Alright, so with this video I'm going to show you kind of an introductory to doing animations with Rhino and Grasshopper. Um, with this we'll do something very simple. Something I like to do is show how water's maybe moving through a site. So we've got these two waterways that are, or a couple of these waterways that we can use to kind of demonstrate that. And there's obviously a variety of ways you can visualize it. Just know that the more detail and geometry that you have associated with the animation, the more lag there could be, potentially just taking longer to render. Sometimes it might even crash your script and computer, so just be mindful of what your computer's capacity is. So in this case, I see that these two kind of end at the same point, more or less. So I'm just going to start off with these two curves. I'm going to reference them here. And basically what I'm going to do is use points and a slider to indicate that movement. So one thing to kind of make sure is that you actually have the water going in the right direction. So something you can do is select them, type dir. It's a little hard to see with the white, but I see that there's the point indicating the start, and that's in fact where we want it to be. So that's already good to go. The next thing you can do is start to create a series of points. So you can actually have them have the same amount of points, so that way the water actually gets there at the same exact time, or you can do it based off of distance to kind of show something a little more accurate where one might get there sooner than the rest. So I'm going to take these two curves. I'm going to, in this case, I'll show you just dividing it by the distance. And let's start off with something like 50. Let's see how dense that looks like. So probably want to show much more than that. Something to be mindful too as you start to do this is understanding the frame rate for your video. So standard videos like to be at a frame rate of at least 30 frames per second. So you have to kind of think about how long you want this animation to last. In this case, we can stick with something simple like 10 seconds. So we can basically use the one that's going to take the longest, so this one, and make sure that we have enough points to show for 10 seconds. So in that case, you're going to want about 30 frames per second at for 10 seconds is going to be needing 300 points, basically. So one frame per 1/30th. Sorry, let me say that. 1 point per 1/30th of a frame, right? So 30 points representing one frame. If it's 30 frames per second, needing 10 of those will get us to that 300 number. So we can see just the output here. We're at 55 and 108, so we have to really kind of make this even more dense. So, oops, a little too high. So 270, that's pretty close. Let's just try 5 for the sake of getting closer. So 324, I can live with that. Okay, so now we got a really dense set of points. The next thing we do to actually animate this, we aren't going to use this to animate it. We're actually going to basically take this list of points and just highlight one through that animation. So I'm going to go to Sets and use List Item. So again, the key is thinking about the frame rate. So I can kind of use this to get an idea. So 324 items. So I'll do 0, less than 323 to give us all 324. And what this will do is as I move this over, we can start to see how these points are moving down that line, right? The thing to be aware of is that notice that as soon as that short one, the shorter one gets to the end, it kind of repeats itself. And that's because this list item says true to rapid. So basically, as soon as it gets to that last point, any number after that will basically continue back. It's kind of interesting to see that almost uh, it's just half the distance. So two of these points almost make it down the same time as one. So, I mean, you can keep that for interest's sake. Um, so you can do it like that. In order to stop it, you can always set this Boolean to false. And now you'll see that as soon as I start it, as soon as that one gets down there, it'll turn orange, but that's fine. And then that's it. So that's one way to do it. Another interesting way, if you want it to almost be like a trail of points, we could also split this list. So I can take this list, use this same slider, and basically just show what's in this first list, which should be nothing at 0. But then as I start to drag it over, we start to get that trail of points, which can be interesting. So like I said, there's a series of ways that you can start to do that. So I'm just going to stick with the simple one of just showing these points. Because like I said, the representation is going to be kind of key in what you do to show that. So the less geometry, the better. In this case, for especially something that's just very introductory, I'm not going to make it too complicated. I will show at least, like if it's not this X, maybe I show another kind of indication. Maybe I just do a simple sphere. So I can do surface, sphere, maybe something like 10. Let's see if how big that looks in comparison. Let's do it a little bit lower. Let's turn that off. So that's better, right? Okay. The next thing again, so what this um, slider does again is a way to kind of show this animation. Oh, we can already start to see that it's those spheres have added some lag to it. So I might even nix this for the purposes of the recording, which is okay because I'll still show you the other valuable parts. Okay. So the way to actually animate this is if you right click and do animate, it's going to bring up this window for you. And what you'll see is that basically everything that's showing up on your Rhino screen is what's going to show up for the video. So this is where you kind of have to do make some effort with the actual representation of some of these things. So you'll see that you basically choose a location to make all these files. It basically just creates a single screen capture for each one of those. The viewport, the resolution, and the frame count. So let's go ahead and cancel out of this real quick. I just want to, again, kind of walk you through this process of getting everything prepared. So like I said, the way it gets visualized is kind of key because it's going to get rendered that way because you don't want to have to actually manually change or do a lot of the editing from those screenshots. So I'm going to go ahead and choose even to have, let's turn this off so I can still use that same blue. And then I'm just going to display these a little bit differently. So it's probably a good idea to use something blue to indicate my water, right? So we can see that nicely. Um, the next thing to do is consider the resolution of your screen. So again, if I go to animate, I can see that it has this default of 640 by 480. I want this to be a decent, at least, video size for even a computer screen. So I want it to be in the 1024 range. So in order to start to set that up and make sure that the animation is actually getting rendered correctly, I'm going to go up to render, render properties. I'm going to start off by making sure sometimes it's set to default. You can set it to viewport, and then you can set it to custom. In this case, again, I want the width to be 1024. This will basically go all the way to the bottom, which is great. I can hit OK. And in order to actually see, because I know my Rhino screen is bigger than 1024, I can go to render and do show save frame. Okay, so there's that. So let's, again, go to render properties. Hit OK. This doesn't seem, let me just double check. Let's try 600 and see what that does. Yeah, I don't know why this isn't changing. Let's try this one more time. $1024 by 500, I guess. Oh, I guess that is decent size. Okay. So let's go ahead and I want to check something. So I'm not too sure on this. Curious to see if it even captures that save frame. Basically, if I do animate, it'll tell me, yep. So we also want to be aware of that. So I'm going to go up to render, save frame settings, and I'm just going to do this all at 100%. So basically now that should be all the way over. Okay, so here's, again, my window. Pretty sure that's all ready and set. So again, I'm going to go to this one to animate. I'm going to choose a location. It's good to actually create a folder because it's going to create however many images you need for that setting. So I'm going to do drainage test, drainage animation test. Oops. Right, there we go. Okay, it doesn't really matter what the name is. Frame count is 323, so however long your number slider is. And again, I'm going to use 1024. I believe it is 500 I set it at. And if we look, it should pretty much look like what we see on that screen. Yep, looks pretty good to me. If you want, you could even turn off the grid settings, but let's just go ahead and hit OK and see what it does. Right, so we can see our sliders starting to move, our X's are moving, So you can kind of see at the top how long it's taking. So luckily it's going to do it much quicker once we put it in the editor. So there we go. There is our video. It should have created them all now. Now you can basically go and change things as you want. You don't have to worry about messing that animation up. So now I'm going to go to After Effects. And it's really simple to put these together, even though it's a whole nother Adobe software. It's, again, a very robust software, so it does take, um, it does quite some powerful things, but for the purpose of this, it's going to be pretty simple. If it's just going to be a simple video of, for example, showing uh, what you've created that animation of those pictures, and that's all there is to the video, then you can use even something as simple as uh, um, Windows Movie Maker. But this one's gonna require a little bit more um, information for it. So you'll see this as the first thing that pops up. We'll hit New Project, do New Composition. In this case, I'm gonna again use that 1024 as both my width. I'm gonna turn off this lock and do 1024 as well. Again, frame rate, we can do 30 exactly. We'll change the background to be white and hit OK. Okay, so here's our screen. So now in order to bring in all those images, we can even change, I'll change that later. So I'll go over to here to my composition and say import file. Even though it's technically a series of files, we're gonna do this one. I'm gonna go to my desktop, go to this drainage test. I'm just gonna hit Control A to select all. And I'm gonna do the import multi-still sequence. They should already be in chronological order, so we don't really have to do much more there. And so you can see that there's this icon showing it's a batch of photos. I'll go ahead and drag that onto there now. And let's see if it shows up. Might be still thinking. Yep. Yeah, I was a little overzealous with that. It does take a second once it kind of processes it. And there it is. So I can just hit spacebar to animate it. So not the most exciting animation, but it's a good, simple way to start to create those videos. Okay, if you want to actually trim the video to be the same length of that, you can always drag that to there. That way, once it gets to the end, it'll stop or repeat itself. All right, well, that's really just the simple way of kind of getting this introductory work set up. Again, basically think about whatever you want to show on here. Go through that process of highlighting it and even adding annotations if you want. So makes it easier for you that way.